what is happening in the Middle East. Very complex situation. As we have seen, it is playing out sort of on an hourly basis. I think for a lot of us over the weekend, we're paying attention to what was happening. Obviously, the Ayatollah has been killed in Iran, potential leadership changes there. We've seen responses across the region, and this sort of changing dynamic. Initially it was just Israel and the US attacking Iran. Obviously, when Iran attacked Saudi Arabia's now said, okay, US, you can use our bases. Other countries have all kind of swung around in what is a very complex time. Interestingly enough, the impact for Australians is already being felt. I flew in from Queensland yesterday, and there are about 5 or 6 Qatar, Emirates, Etihad planes all grounded at Melbourne Airport. Something like 28,000 flights have been cancelled worldwide, notwithstanding the fact that both Erin and I have friends across the zone from UAE, Dubai. I've got friends in Oman as well as Israel. So what's happening in the Middle East? So Erin, obviously you're a well-recognised expert in Australia on international and geopolitical politics. What's your take on what's happening in the region?
No pressure.
No pressure there. No pressure.
I wish I had a crystal ball. Yeah, I mean, look, I've had a lot of messages from people who say, "Oh, what's your take, Erin, or what do you think?" And like, I don't have a crystal ball. So, but what I do have is I've got lots of different perspectives flying around from other people I'm talking about, and who are very well informed. And I sort of say, well, is this going to be a fundamental change in Iran? And one camp is saying, absolutely not. It's just going to be more of the same. This is President Trump saying, I've now toppled this leader, and now it's going to be up to the Iranian people for what comes next. When you look at the complexity of their system, it's probably going to be more of the same. Mm-hmm. So that's one sort of argument. But then the other side of things is that, this is going to be drawn out for a very, very long time. Now, I kind of hope neither of those things are true in a way. Like, you don't want it to be obviously more of the same in Iran, and you don't want a protracted crisis in the Middle East, because we've already had plenty of protracted crises in the Middle East. And, as our guests before said, it's the consequences of that for people across the region are just, it's just going to be, the humanitarian system is already under strain. So we don't need any more protracted conflicts. But I was on the phone all weekend, or for much of the weekend, with my best friend, lives in Abu Dhabi. She's been there for 20 years. And, her husband's in London. So she's at home with the 3 kids, which is just a really hard situation to be in, because 1, you're on your own, but 2, he's obviously isolated from his kids as well. There's no way out. Originally, the messages were coming through from DFAT saying so there was voluntary exits of officials' families and children in the day leading up to basically everything shutting down. And when you live in a place like the Gulf, as you would probably know from your friends, Neil, things like this happen, like there are conflicts around you, and you get very used to living in in a war zone, basically, in a very high conflict area. And so when you get warnings coming through, I'm not going to say you desensitize to them, because you're always watching and you always have plans, but you kind of go, okay, we've seen this before. And so, but then this time it did happen. That's the difference, after 20 years of having my friend there.
Yeah, and the consequences have been quite far-reaching, I think, for this one in particular. So, obviously a number of people have died in Dubai. Dubai International Airport has been attacked. The Fairmont Resort on Palm Jumeirah has been attacked. The Burj Al Arab, has also been attacked. So these are not... So the interesting side of this that's very interesting is none of these facilities are military, nor are they even close to military facilities. And the interesting side of it is this will send shockwaves through the UAE, which has prided itself, on security, stability, the cash flows of having everybody there. So, there's a real economic conundrum now for the UAE, which includes Abu Dhabi and Dubai. I think there's something like 25,000 Australians in the UAE working and living there, huge population. And so on one side of the equation, you have sort of the traffic air travel issue in and out. You also have a country with a huge number of Australians in it where civilian lives are being lost. And the attacks from Iran are fairly indiscriminate. They don't seem to be targeting military facilities. And then the other complexity you have, and like you, and I'll do a call out as well, wind back to our previous episode if you get the opportunity, and our discussion with Kylie Moore Gilbert. Really great insight into Iran. But I was speaking to a couple of Iranian friends over the weekend, and one of them's in a WhatsApp group, and he messaged out sort of last eve a very interesting message, and I think this is the complexity of it. He said, hi everyone, thanks for your support for what's happening here in Iran. After 47 years, we're finally being listened to. We hope these actions will result in Iranians finally taking control of their own country and choosing their own government. So it's quite interesting. This is the Iranian diaspora in Australia. Sometimes they refer to themselves as the Persian community. So you've got sort of lots of complexity and yet seemingly celebrations from some of the Iranian community, despite the complexity of the situation. So where does this for all of us?
Because that's really interesting, because when they say, oh, we it's that sort of self-determination thing now and we want to vote in our government. But I did find over the weekend how the government is actually structured, and the role of the Supreme Leader, who's obviously been killed now. I have my phone here because with my not handy little chart. But yes, you vote in the Assembly of Experts, the Parliament and the President, but the control that the Supreme Leader has over, they command the armed forces, they appoint the Expediency Council, they approve the Cabinet, they appoint the IRGC. So yes, if you look at that, there's sort of three elements of their system that get voted in, but the rest is determined, appointed essentially by the Supreme Leader. So that's the bit that I was saying, is it going to be more of the same, because it is a really complex and quite deeply embedded system. And is the IRGC just going to roll over and say now,
The IRGC, for those listening, is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
Yeah. And so they're essentially a state within a state. And that's the complexity. So yes, go back and listen to the episode with Kylie Moore Gilbert. She's got some great insights there. But when you mentioned the UAE and how proud they are of, of the security and so on, the messaging that came from them over the weekend, which my friend sent to me from the basement of her house, is that the Ministry of Defence, the UAE air defence system successfully intercepted 137 Iranian missiles and 209 drones. So the messaging that they're sending to their people is that we are looking after you. Actually, we have protected you from Iran. Not, this, it's not aggressive. It's saying to people, we are helping you. We are looking after you. And because a lot of now the UAE's future and their economy, which does kind of go in cycles, is going to depend on having a workforce of people there. They do have taxation now, no income tax, but they do have company tax. Companies are 51% owned by locals. If you come in as a foreigner, they need to be able to protect that economic model which they have there. So I noticed. Chris Fade, very famous Australian who is a Virgin Radio host in the UAE. He's a Lebanese Australian who's been out there for 20 years as well. He was sending lots of very I think sometimes is a bit of like a soft diplomat for the UAE, and was talking, about how great the country is and how much they're looking after and what you can do as as someone looking after your family there. So that is the messaging that they send out, that we are here to look after you. But you mentioned, I just want to pick up on one thing that you said, Neil, really importantly, as you mentioned attack on the Burj Al Arab. It wasn't an attack on the Burj Al Arab, it was an intercepted drone. So it's like it's the collateral damage. I think there was an attack close to the Burj Khalifa. And that was like, if you attack the Burj Khalifa, that is an attack on, that's the kind of like, well, World War III is about to kick off kind of thing. Because that is an attack on progress and so it is really complicated. I think we're going to have material for a very long time when it comes to the Middle East.
It's a very interesting situation. Obviously, sort of, we're very privileged and lucky in Australia that, a lot of Australians now are like, oh my God, I can't do my Europe trips. And, flights are being, there's a desensitization of this. But, the conflict is very, very real. And we're seeing a shifting dynamic that we haven't necessarily seen in the Middle East for quite a while. So, Iran effectively attacking 6 other nations, largely part of the states, part of the GCC or the Gulf Collaboration or
Mm.
Communities. Not sure what GCC stands for, but sort of the 6 more westernized Gulf states are all very, very worried over what's been happening. And all of them have been
Gulf
attacked.
cooperation countries, I think.
Gulf
Yeah.
cooperation
Which
countries, there
is
you
the
go.
Gulf cooperation country, the GCC. Yeah. Yeah.
Have
And I
been
think
very
within
worried.
the GCC, Oman is like the Switzerland of the GCC.
Oman was, and I was very lucky last year. I went to Oman.
You
I'm
went.
meant to be
It's a
going back
great
again this
country.
year.
Yeah.
But
Are you flying through? It's a great hub to fly
I
through.
was
Have
gonna
you done the
fly. I
old?
was gonna fly Oman
Yeah.
Air back to the Europe in
Which
September this
one?
year. Heading back to Italy and checking in with my sort of the Italian side of my family. But no, Oman has typically been the Switzerland of this space and was actually navigating the diplomatic discussions between the US and Iran before this
Yes.
kind of kicked
Yeah.
off. But
Yeah.
interestingly enough, it's sort of there's been huge consequences around shipping. So obviously, Maastricht Lines, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, a global shipping company is actually diverting all of its ships around the out of the Suez Canal and around the Cape. So, there's already going to be that adds additional weeks to shipping and shipping traffic and other bits and pieces in the region. So the flow through will be quite substantial. We've already seen a spike
Well,
in petrol prices in
yeah.
Australia.
Yeah, they're up. Do you know the other interesting thing, Neil, is that we talked about Somaliland in a previous episode as well. And if you look at like in the lead up to this crisis, Israel recognizing Somaliland, which is on the other side of the Gulf of Aden, sort of facing Yemen, which is to sort of the for those
Hope
who aren't
points, I
familiar, to
think.
the west of Oman. Yeah. So that again, that's very strategic timing of Israel recognizing Somaliland as the first country to do that. But obviously, the implications for us here. One, okay, so the travel. I have some Qatar flights coming up. I'm like, she'll be right. We'll be right in May. It's fine. But who knows, because they are attacking the airports. The implications around cost of living as well because of trade. That's going to be another big one. Like, I think that we're, since COVID, we're a little bit better at understanding the local implications of a global crisis. And this is going to add another layer to that.
Our global supply chains are now so intermixed, whether it be petrol prices, which spiked, or sort of all of the other goods and services. And it's quite interesting as well, while Iran faces the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf, the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, which you were talking about there, can be controlled by the Houthis, which are operating out of Somalia. And the Houthis are a proxy of the Iranian government, which is why obviously the Suez Canal could be closed, which obviously, huge amount of global traffic flows through Egypt and the Suez Canal before going into that tight passageway where Somaliland exists, but also where Djibouti, Eritrea, and Yemen kind of all come together. Now, it's quite interesting. We hear as well that the US has destroyed a large part of Iran's navy, and this was done very, very deliberately because of the fear that this could close the Straits of, you'll know how to pronounce it probably better. Is it the Straits of Hormuz? I think it is.
Hormuz, yeah.
Hormuz.
Yeah.
What do you think this is going to cause Australia? What's the consequences for us if that strait is closed?
I need to now get my dad to come onto this show for us. But the reason I want to do a little Nepo, it's like the Nepo baby, Nepo dad, like, I don't know. My father's a ship's captain, master mariner, so could drive any size vessel anywhere in the world. Very like highly skilled captain, and spent a lot of his time around this region when I was growing up, and has some cracking stories about being like arrested and held at gunpoint in Yemen, sitting off, in the Strait of Hormuz looking at Iran. Like, he's got some cracking stories. So he would be he actually needs his own podcast. But, I think that, and also to provide some more informed analysis on these strategic questions around Iran and the region overall. But, the consequences are not just, and the reason I think I bring him up is because he's merchant navy, and that's where, that's the passage of goods, that's,
Yeah.
our trade, that's, so where any of that access is restricted, every when you have to go, if you think about why the Panama Canal exists and so on, is to get goods to you faster and cheaper. And anything that slows that down is bad for you and me. So that's the kind of like the tangible thing, the things that are going to cost more in the supermarket. The petrol bowser, I think, like I was looking before, petrol's up at what, $2.20. But also, the sheer number of civilians in the merchant navy who then get sort of implicated in these. If I was a kid now looking at that and my dad was working off, in the Gulf again, it's really, that's kind of scary stuff too, because, inevitably there is this inextricable link between these conflicts and the merchant navy as well. So that's kind of one of the things that jumps to my mind as someone who's really grown up around that world.
And it's quite interesting as well. Obviously, we've spent a bit of time talking about sort of the civilian and the Australian impact, but it's actually unusual because the airspace is still currently closed, not just over Iran and Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Jordan and Israel and Bahrain and Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Like, this is the airspace of sort of, and Yemen, by the way. 10 countries have their airspace closed at the moment as well, which is a really troublesome issue for global aviation. Interestingly enough, this is sending most of the planes either over Afghanistan and sort of Turkmenistan to the north, or they're heading over.
And Afghanistan and Pakistan just kicked off a war last week as well. So they're in conflict. Maybe, Neil, we could discuss potential other flight routes for those of you who are going to Europe. Now, I have a nomination.
Well,
you mentioned Oman.
With Russia closed as well, we're very limited on the number of.
So where are we flying? We're flying. I'm gonna put one in for Sri Lanka.
Well, you and I both.
I reckon that's a good way to go.
Sri Lanka. Yep, Sri Lanka and Sri Lankan Airlines. Absolutely a great part of the world. So look, as said, this week in the pub test, we're very pleased to touch on sort of the week that was in politics for Albo, obviously touching in some of the issues of Grace Tame, the bomb threat on the lodge, what's been happening politically, and the continued and sustained rise of One Nation. We've then seen the sort of the national topic du jour up until the war started or kicked off a notch over the weekend was obviously the ISIS brides and their repatriation from Australia. And we're very pleased to have Matt Tinkler, the CEO of Save the Children, talk to us about the very human, very sort of, human nature of that conflict and the repatriation. And then we've dived into what's happening in the Middle East, where 10 airspaces is closed, shipping shutting down, our fuel prices are rising, and watch this space for further complications. Now, it's quite interesting sort of seeing the countries and the Australian response, given there's a lot of Australians in this region. And so reaching out and making sure that all Australians can safely get home, I think, will be a big thing over the next couple of days. And given so many people, including some of our listeners, have family and friends across the region, and hopefully they'll all get home safely as we watch this conflict unravel and hopefully unravel and hopefully resolve itself sooner rather than later. So it's a really topical time for all of us on the pub test. But the question is, with all of this international conflict, who are we going to have a drink with talking Middle East? I think your dad is a ship's captain. It was great to have Matt join us here. But we'll definitely have to reach out and try and find some experts to have a beer with to talk Middle Eastern politics on the pub test.
With my dad, you'd have a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon. That's his drink of choice. And he'd love a Cab Sav and just sit here and tell us all about the shipping stories from the Gulf.
Would that be a Margaret River Cab
Sav?
Is that the
probably
choice?
A Margaret River Cab Sav is a good southwestern Australian. That's I don't know, like a Vass Felix or something, maybe.
There you
I don't know.